In this crazy world, it's so hard to unwind. So I'm taking time just for me. Gonna find my peace, let my soul be free. In the quiet moments, that's where I'll find a little room to breathe and leave it all behind. Give me room to breathe, I need some time to heal my heart, to clear my mind. Gonna love myself, yeah, I believe in the power of me. Just give me room to breathe.
Great new day to all my self-care family and friends. Welcome back for another Room to Breathe podcast. I'm your host, Life Coach 614, and I am so happy that you've made space to be here with us today. Now, before we get into today's episode, I need everybody to do me a quick favor. If you're feeling the vibe, go ahead and show some love. Tap the screen, like, comment, but most importantly, I need you to share this out with someone who may need a little healing energy today. And if this is your first time here or you haven't already done so, go ahead and give us a follow. Subscribe to our channel so that way you're always tapped in when a new episode drops. I also want to invite you to check out our digital home at theselfcareclub.org, where you will find everything from affirmative apparel to motivational merch and a ton of free resources to help nourish your growth and remind you that you are supported every step of the way. Just know that you don't have to do this alone. We are healing in community, growing one breath, one moment, one day at a time. So today, I encourage you to give yourself permission to pause, to reflect, and to make space for peace, for growth, but most importantly for you. And remember, if, anything in this episode hits home, go ahead and drop some green hearts in the chat. That's our community's way of saying that I am healing, I am growing, and I am showing up for me. Now, let's get ready to breathe, reflect, and grow together. This morning, I woke up thinking, what if this year you stop explaining yourself? And this is a question that I've had on my mind because I think that all of us sometimes get caught in this trap of explaining ourselves and explaining who we are or explaining what we're doing or why we're doing it, right? And so I was asking myself, what if this year you stop explaining yourself? What if this is the year, right? And I don't mean like in a loud way, not in a dramatic way, not in a you got to go cut everybody off way. Not the cut them off and burn the bridge way, right? But what about in the quiet, grounded, deeply intentional way? What if this year you realize how much energy you've been spending trying to make yourself understandable to people who were never committed to truly understanding you anyway? Because let's be real. Some of us don't just explain ourselves occasionally, right? We give context, we give history, we give these like emotional footnotes and backstories and disclaimers, just in case somebody misunderstands us. It's like we explain our tone, we explain our timing, our boundaries. We explain why we're tired, why we're choosing differently, why we're no longer available for, what we used to tolerate. And if you're honest, you're not doing all of that explaining because you love to talk. You're doing it because somewhere they might leave you, right? That they may judge you. They may withhold love or support or approval. So you started making yourself smaller and louder at the same time. And when I say smaller and louder at the same time, I'm talking about like smaller in your needs, louder in your justifications, You learned how to package your truth so it wouldn't be offensive, how to soften your no so it wouldn't feel, like, or so it wouldn't like trigger guilt, how to overfunction emotionally so everyone else would stay comfortable. But I think here's the question that we don't ask enough. At what point does explaining yourself turn into self-abandonment? At what point does clarity become performance? At what point does communication turn into emotional labor? Because there is a difference between healthy communication and constantly pleading your case for your own life. And maybe, just maybe, the reason you're exhausted isn't because you're doing too much. It's because you're explaining too much to people who don't require that level of access to you anymore. What if healing isn't about finding better words, but about trusting yourself enough to stop offering explanations where they're not earned? What if peace doesn't come from being understood by everyone, but finally just understanding yourself? That's what we're going to talk about today. Releasing the need for validation, letting go of over justification, and stepping out of emotional labor that was never yours to carry in the first place. And when I think about growth doesn't always sound like clarity. And I think that's something that we don't fully understand, right? Growth sometimes sounds like silence. And sometimes silence is the most self-respecting answer you can give. So I guess to kind of start this off, I want to talk about when explaining yourself becomes a survival skill. I think that for a lot of us, explaining ourselves didn't start because we wanted attention. It started because we needed safety, right? Somewhere early on, you learned that just being wasn't enough, right? Your feelings needed proof. Your boundaries needed justification. Your reactions needed explanation. So over the years, you adapted, right? You learned how to read the room before you spoke, how to anticipate questions before they were asked, how to give context so no one could twist your words or intentions. You became the person who says, let me explain what I meant, even when what you meant was already clear. Because being misunderstood wasn't just uncomfortable, it felt dangerous, right? Maybe, misunderstanding led to conflict for you. Maybe it led to punishment or silence or emotional withdrawal or even abandonment. Maybe you grew up in spaces where your no was challenged, where your emotions were minimized or your needs were treated like inconveniences. So you learned a quiet lesson, right? If I explain myself well enough, maybe I'll be safe. And if that sounds like you, I want you to understand that that's not weakness. That's wisdom born out of survival. But here's the thing that survival never tells us. What keeps you alive is one season, right? Or what keeps you alive in one season can suffocate you in the next. What once protected you now cost you your energy. What once helped you to connect now drains you. What once kept the peace now steals your rest. And I think that it shows up in very subtle ways, right? You rehearse conversations in your head before they happen. You feel anxious after setting a boundary, wondering if you said too much or not enough. You send follow-up messages just to clarify when clarity was already there. And so ultimately, you're not confused, you're conditioned. Conditioned to believe that your truth needs approval, conditioned to believe that your feelings need permission, conditioned to believe that silence equals danger. But healing asks new questions. It asks things like, what if you don't need to explain yourself to feel safe anymore? What if the people who require the endless explanations are no longer meant to have a front row access to your life? And what if learning to stop explaining isn't about becoming closed off, but about finally trusting that your presence, your decisions, and your boundaries are valid without defense? You don't have to unlearn survival overnight, but you can start noticing when it shows up. And I think that awareness is the first sign that you are no longer just surviving. And so there's this quiet exhaustion that comes with emotional labor, right? And when I say like exhaustion, I'm talking about the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. Not the physical tired, not the I need a nap tired. I'm talking about the exhaustion that comes from constantly managing emotions that aren't yours to carry. What I like to call soul tired, right? Because emotional labor isn't always loud, but sometimes it's just quiet. It's polite. It's invisible. It's the way you explain your boundaries before anybody questions them. It's how you soften your truth so nobody feels attacked. It's the mental work of making sure your healing doesn't inconvenience anybody else. And so emotional labor looks like explaining why your no isn't personal. Reassuring people that you still care even while you're choosing you. Feeling guilty for protecting your energy. Or even carrying weight of other people's disappointment. Rich Risings, Cal. Oh, I'm sorry, Elevated Awakenings, Cal. Welcome in. And so, when you think about all of that, what makes it even heavier is that most of the time, nobody asks you to do this, right? Nobody asked you to explain. You volunteered it, right? Because somewhere along the way, you learned that it was your job to keep things smooth, to keep the peace, right? To make sure that nobody walks away feeling uncomfortable, even if you do. So you show up as the translator, the mediator, the emotional buffer. Welcome in, Shonda. Elevated Awakening. And so now that you've identified as the translator and the mediator and the emotional buffer, you don't just make a decision, you package it. Elevated Awakenings, Lady Blue. Right? You package it up and you just don't set a boundary, you explain it gently, repeatedly, with compassion and context, right? And over time, that constant caretaking becomes draining. You start feeling resentful, but you don't always know why. You start feeling overwhelmed, but nothing looks wrong on the surface. You start to feel disconnected from yourself because you're always tuned into everybody else. And so here's the truth that I believe that we need to say out loud. And it's simply that you are not responsible for managing other people's emotions in response to your healing. If you don't walk away with anything else today, I want you to walk away knowing that you are not responsible for managing other people's emotions in response to your healing. Thank you for the heart, me. Discomfort is not harm. Disappointment is not danger. And someone else's inability to self-regulate is not your assignment. Emotional labor becomes a problem when your peace is the price. And if you are exhausted, it's not because you're failing at self-care. It's because you've been doing too much care for others without caring for yourself. And the thing about healing is that it doesn't require you to explain your boundaries until, everybody feels okay about them. Sometimes healing just looks like choosing rest over reassurance, silence over functioning, and letting people feel what they feel without rushing to fix it. I mean, think about it. In your healing journey, nobody's running to save you. Nobody's running in here to fix you and make sure that you're okay. So why are you running around trying to make sure that everybody else is okay? It's called self-care for a reason. There's a certain level of care that we all owe to ourselves. So again, let people feel what they feel without rushing to fix it. That's not cruelty. Honestly, it's just a release, right? It's a reprioritizing. It's saying, yeah, I love you, but I love me more. And I think that some of us get so caught up in this whole validation addiction, right? That there's a point where approval becomes the goal. And so if we're going to talk about validation, I want to make sure that it's not from a place of shame, but from a place of truth. Because needing validation doesn't mean that you're insecure, right? It often means that you were taught that love and safety and acceptance were conditional. Conditional on being agreeable, on being understood, on being approved. So somewhere along the way, validation stopped being a nice bonus and became a requirement. And it started quietly. Tania, welcome back. Elevated Awakening. Right? That validation, it starts quietly. You shared something vulnerable and waited to see how it landed. You made a decision but needed reassurance before you could feel at peace with it. You felt something deeply but didn't trust it until somebody else confirmed it. So when you think about validation addiction, it doesn't always look dramatic, right? Sometimes it looks like overchecking your choices with others. Sometimes it sounds like, sis, am I tripping? Tell me I'm wrong, right? Or I just want to make sure I'm not being unreasonable. When you know damn well that you are not being unreasonable. And over time, without realizing it, you hand your self-trust away piece by piece. Because when approval becomes the goal, you stop listening to your own inner knowing, right? You start editing yourself in real time. You delay decisions until somebody else co-signs them. You stay in situations longer than you should because you're waiting on confirmation that it's okay to leave. But the hard truth is that if somebody benefits from you doubting yourself, they will never validate you enough to set you free. Thank you. If somebody benefits from you doubting yourself enough, they will never validate you enough to set you free. I know, right? Some people don't want to understand you. They just want to keep access to you. They want control. They want you to second guess yourself because it keeps the power dynamic intact. And no amount of explaining will change the mind of someone who is invested in your uncertainty. So yeah, validation feels good in the moment, but it is temporary. And self-trust is quieter, but it lasts longer. And so I honestly believe that healing begins when you stop asking, do they get it? And you start asking, do I feel aligned with this? Because the goal isn't to be approved of. The goal is to be at peace with yourself. And so sometimes the bravest thing that you can do is make a decision and stand by it, right? And let the room be silent. That silence is where your self-trust starts to grow. And another thing is that over justifying, thinking about just the concept behind over justifying, that is a trauma response, not a flaw. So just because you are a person who over justifies or you over explain things, that doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It's not a flaw. It is a trauma response. And so I want to say this tenderly, slowly, because I think that somebody needs to hear this without flinching, because a lot of times when we are talking about our healing and we're pointing out the things that we're doing to hinder our healing, we tend to flinch and tense up. We take it personal, right? These is the toe stepping moments, right? But I want you guys to hear this without flinching, because over explaining is not a character flaw. Over justifying is not a lack of confidence. It is a trauma response. It's what happens when your reality was questioned for far too long, when your feelings were debated instead of honored, where your boundaries were treated like negotiations instead of limits. So if you grew up or spent time in environments where your no was met with pressure, guilt, or consequences, you learned something important early on. And that was that clarity alone wasn't safe. So you learned how to add explanations, right? That's how you coped. You started off learning how to add explanations, then reasons, then emotional cushioning. You learned to provide proof of your pain so it wouldn't be dismissed. You learned to walk people through your thought process so they wouldn't accuse you of being irrational. You learned to justify your needs so you wouldn't be labeled ungrateful or dramatic or selfish. But that wasn't weakness. It was adaptation. And so healing asks you to pause. Just because you can explain yourself doesn't mean that you should, especially when the explanation is costing you your peace. Trauma teaches you to stay ahead of conflict. Healing teaches you that you don't have to. Trauma says, make sure they understand you or else. But healing says, they don't have to agree for this to be valid. My feelings are my feelings, and my feelings are valid, right? And I think that this is where a lot of people get uncomfortable, because stopping the explanation can feel like danger at first. Thank you for the follow. Silence that comes with that might feel a little rude. Thank you for the heart me. The silence might feel rude. The boundaries might feel cold. Not clarifying may feel a bit like abandonment. But discomfort doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong. It often means that you're doing something new. So understand that you are allowed to say no without explaining the backstory. You are allowed to change your mind without presenting evidence. Like, you don't need to build a whole case for your no. You are allowed to protect your peace without making it palatable. And by that, I mean, you don't have to dissect it into tiny pieces so other people can chew it. Your needs don't require an entire PowerPoint presentation. Your boundaries don't need footnotes. Your healing doesn't need approval. Clarity is enough. And I believe that the more that you practice honoring that, the less you'll feel the urge to defend your existence. You are more than welcome, claim it. I love the name. And so that's not becoming hardened, right? Because the soft life is our goal. So we don't want to harden, right? But practicing, this and stepping away from the need to defend our very existence, it helps us to gain freedom, right? That freedom is the goal. Free to be me, free to love me, right? Free to just be. But we have to understand the power of saying less. Our generation, our culture now is on the whole say less, right? Everybody runs around saying say less. But many of us are still saying too much. And so I want to talk about the power of saying less. Because there is a version of strength that I think that we don't celebrate enough. And that is the strength of restraint. The strength of not feeling the silence. The strength of not over-explaining. The strength of trusting that what you said was enough. Because again, when you've spent years explaining yourself, silence can feel a little unsettling. It can feel like you're being misunderstood. Like you're being misrepresented. Like you need a quick step, a step back in and clarify. But the truth is, saying less doesn't mean that you have to have less to say. It just means that you're choosing peace over performance. Sometimes the most powerful response isn't another explanation. It's a pause. Right? I'm not available for that. This no is final. I've already made my decision. No apology. No emotional padding. No justification. And so, at first it may feel a little uncomfortable because you're used to filling spaces with reassurance. But watch what happens when you don't. You're going to start to notice who reacts to, the things that you're saying, who respects your boundaries without interrogation. Thank you so much. You'll start to see who only listens when they're being accommodated. You'll start to feel your nervous system settle because you're no longer on guard. Saying less is a form of self-trust, right? It's trusting that your words don't need reinforcement, that your clarity doesn't need consensus, that your decisions don't require debate. Yeah, when you pull your energy back, that's when the real people show up, right? That's where the representatives that they sent in disappear and they reveal who they really are. And here's something important. The people who genuinely care about you, They don't need long explanations. They listen the first time because they respect your time. They value your time. They respect your limits. They don't demand access to parts of you that you've chosen to protect. For the right people, what's understood doesn't have to be explained. And contrary to what they tell you, when you stop explaining, you're not being passive aggressive. You're just being intentional. And isn't that what life is all about? Right? Choosing to conserve your energy, choosing to stop overfunctioning emotionally. You're choosing to let your boundaries speak for themselves. Exactly. Saying less isn't about shutting down. It's about standing firm without the noise. And in that quiet, something powerful happens. You finally hear yourself, right? Because all the noise isn't drowning it out anymore. You finally hear you. So we got to learn to let people be uncomfortable with our growth. And I think that that's one of the hardest parts of healing, right? A lot of people try to say that change, right? You changing is the hardest part. But I think that one of the hardest parts of healing is letting people witness the change without explaining it. Because when you grow, not everybody grows with you. Some people were only comfortable with the version of you who over-explained. The one who bent first. The version who made room even when he or she didn't have room for themselves. And so when that version is no longer available, it creates discomfort. Not because you're wrong, but because the dynamic has shifted. Welcome in, Jazzy. Elevated awakenings to you. So again, it's not because you're wrong. It's just simply because the dynamic has shifted. And so what often happens when you stop explaining yourself is that other people, they feel unsettled, right? They start to ask more questions. They push for clarity that you've already given. And then when they ask the questions and you stand on business, then they start projecting, right? Suddenly you're labeled with you're changed, you're distant, you acting different, you acting brand new, you think you better than, or you all that. But what they're really saying is, I don't recognize the version of you that no longer puts me first. I don't recognize the version of you that no longer centers me. That's what all that means. But they don't have the words for it. So they begin to project their feelings and emotions on you to make you feel less than as you go about life bettering yourself. But one of the funny things about growth is that growth removes access. And not everybody knows how to sit with that. And so here's where the work gets real, because your instinct might be to rush in and soothe, to make them feel better, to coddle them, right? To explain your intentions, to reassure them that I'm still Shantae, I'm still the same me. Or to even minimize your growth so they don't feel left behind. But healing is going to ask you to pause, right? Because you're not responsible for easing someone else through your evolution. Discomfort doesn't mean that you're harming them. It just means that you're adjusting to a new boundary. And some people will adjust. They will. They'll learn. And they'll meet you where you are. Those are the keepers. They gain access into the next season. But others won't. And that's okay too. they lost access to the next season. And I think that's where grief comes in, because letting people be uncomfortable sometimes means letting relationships change or end without closure, without long explanations. You don't need to prove that your growth is legitimate. You don't need to convince anyone that you're still kind or loving or caring. Your growth doesn't require witnesses to understand it. Let them people feel what they feel. Let them sit with their reactions. Let them decide what they can hold. Let them figure out what they have the capacity for. Right? Y'all know let them was a big thing for us last year. And I think let them is something that I carried from 2025 into 2026 with me. Let them talk if they want to talk. Let me heal how I'm going to heal. Because ultimately, choosing yourself is not abandonment. It is alignment. And alignment will always disrupt what was built on your silence. You've got to choose self-trust over being understood. I think that there comes a moment in healing when you realize that something has shifted, right? And it's that being understood is not the same as being at peace. For a long time, you may have believed that if people could just see your heart, if they could just understand your intentions, that everything would settle, right? But understanding doesn't always bring safety. And misunderstanding doesn't always mean you're wrong. Choosing self-trust just simply means that you stop measuring your decisions by how they're received. It means that you make choices from alignment instead of anticipation, from inner clarity instead of outer approval. And so self-trust sounds like, this feels right for me. I don't need to explain this. I'm okay standing alone in my decision. And yeah, I'm not going to hold you. It can feel terrifying at first, especially if you were taught to keep the peace at all costs. Because when you stop explaining yourself, there's no one to lean on for reassurance. It's just you, your values, your intuition, and your boundaries. And that's where the confidence is built. Not in the loud declarations, but in that quiet follow through. In that I said what I said. Mic drop, exit stage left. Let the audience feel how they're going to feel. You stop chasing conversations that drain you. You stop defending choices that you've already made. And you stop revisiting decisions that soothe someone else's discomfort. You let your life speak for itself. And when you choose self-trust, you start to feel more steady. You move with less anxiety, and you stop second guessing yourself after every interaction. You begin to realize that you don't need a room full of people to agree with your path or your decisions in order for them to be valid. Sometimes the bravest thing that you can do is trust yourself, even when it costs you approval. Because peace doesn't come from being understood. It comes from no longer betraying yourself in the process of trying to be understood. And so when you choose self-trust, something shifts. Like I said, you stop explaining and you start embodying. And that's where your power lives. That's where you thrive. Spark motivation, elevated awakenings, bro. Welcome in. So again, you don't owe an explanation for your healing. You don't. And if this episode is stirring something in you, I want you to sit with it. Don't rush past it. Because the truth is, a lot of your exhaustion hasn't come from you doing too much. It comes from you explaining too much. Explaining your boundaries. Explaining your distance. Explaining your growth. Explaining why you're no longer available for things that cost you your peace. And somewhere along the way, you may have started to believe that if you didn't explain yourself, you were being selfish or cold or unkind. So I want to just take this moment to reframe that for you, right? To tell you what maybe you think you need to hear, but I believe you already know. And it's that you're not selfish for choosing yourself. You're not unkind for protecting your energy. And you're not wrong for refusing to overwork your nervous system for people who refuse to do their own inner work. Healing doesn't always look like a conversation. Sometimes it looks like restraint. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like walking away without giving a final speech. And I know that part is hard because you want to be understood. You want to be seen clearly. You want your heart to be recognized. But again, the people who are meant to walk with you into this next season, they don't need a full explanation. They don't need you to shrink your truth or soften your boundaries. And they don't need you to convince them that your growth is real. They feel it. And for the ones who demand explanations, who resist your clarity, or who push back against your boundaries, they're showing you something important. And I need you to see it. And I need you to believe it. They're showing you something not about your character, but about their capacity. Let them. Let them talk if they want to. Just go heal how you gonna heal. So let 2026 be the year that you stop over functioning emotionally. And you know what? If you hear this in 2027, 2028, whenever you listen to this, let this year be the year that you stop over functioning emotionally. Let this be the year that you stop rehearsing conversations in your head. Let this be the year that you stop justifying decisions that you've already made in your spirit. Let this be the year that you trust yourself more than you trust being understood. Because at the end of the day, peace doesn't require an audience. Alignment doesn't need agreement. And your healing does not require permission. You don't owe anyone an explanation for choosing yourself. You've already explained enough. So now it's just time to live it. Stop talking about it and just go be about it. Now, before we part ways, let me leave you all with a little extra love and light. As always, I encourage you to keep breathing through the highs, the lows, and every moment in between. I want you to keep choosing peace, even if it feels out of reach. And know that here at the Self Care Club, you will always be seen, always valued, and always supported. So don't be afraid to take up space, speak your truth, and make a little room for you to breathe. I love each and every one of you to life, and I am praying that your day is not just amazing, but aligned, intentional, and yes, on purpose, filled with purpose. This has been another Room to Breathe podcast, and I cannot wait to connect with you all again soon. Thank you.